Have you ever paused for a second before picking up chopsticks and wondered why this simple pair of sticks became one of the most enduring tools in human history? Imagine the scene. A bowl is placed in front of you, steam rising in slow, curling threads. The smell hits first. Garlic, oil, something savory and warm. Your fingers close around two smooth sticks. They tap lightly against the bowl, almost politely, like asking permission. It feels normal, automatic. But that normal feeling hides something strange. Chopsticks were never designed as eating utensils. They didn't begin at the table. They began in fire, steam, and urgency. They were born in kitchens, not dining rooms. And their rise had less to do with tradition and more to do with survival, efficiency, and the kind of peace people wanted when they finally sat down to eat. Today, we're uncovering why chopsticks were invented and why the real reason is very different from what most people assume. A utensil is easy to mistake for culture. We tend to look at tools that have lasted for centuries and assume they exist because of symbolism, identity, or habit. Every utensil starts as a solution. It answers a specific question. How do you move food from heat to mouth without injury, waste, or chaos? Knives and forks answer one version of that problem. They assume food arrives on the plate unfinished. Too large. Too tough. Something that still needs tearing, pinning, or slicing before it can be eaten. Chopsticks assume the opposite. They assume the work has already been done. The cutting, the dividing, the shaping all happened earlier in the kitchen. By the time food reaches the table, it is ready. Ready to lift, ready to turn, ready to dip, share, and eat. That single assumption changes everything. Before chopsticks were elegant or symbolic, they were simply the right tool for food that was already prepared to be eaten. To really understand them, you have to step away from the dining table and back into an ancient kitchen. Archaeological evidence suggests that chopstick-like tools existed in China as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. These early versions weren't slender bamboo sticks resting on porcelain holders. They were often made of bronze, long and sturdy, designed to reach into boiling pots and open flames. Picture a large communal vessel set over fire. The food inside is hot, the steam intense. Reaching in with bare hands is impossible. Spoons are clumsy. A pair of long sticks suddenly makes sense. They act like extensions of the fingers, nimble and precise, letting someone grab, stir, or retrieve food without being burned. In that world, chopsticks were closer to tongs than tableware. Eating with hands was still common. Spoons existed. The two sticks belonged firmly to the cooking process. So how did a cooking tool migrate from the fire to the table and refuse to leave for thousands of years? The answer lies in something surprisingly unromantic: population pressure. As ancient Chinese societies grew denser, especially in urban centers, resources became tighter. Fuel, in particular, mattered. Cooking food took wood, charcoal, time, and labor. One way to stretch fuel further was simple. Cut food into smaller pieces before cooking. Smaller pieces cook faster. Faster cooking means less fuel burned. Less fuel burned means more meals, more people fed, more stability in a crowded world. This shift wasn't about taste or aesthetics. It was math. Survival math. But this quiet change in the kitchen had a ripple effect at the table. When food is already cut into bite-sized pieces before it's cooked, the knife loses its role during the meal. A blade on the table becomes unnecessary, even awkward. What's the point of cutting something that's already been divided? What diners needed instead was a way to pick up small, slippery pieces without crushing them. Something precise. Something gentle. Two sticks, already familiar from cooking, suddenly fit perfectly. Chopsticks didn't replace knives because they were more refined. They replaced them because the knife's job had already been done before the meal began. This practical shift aligned almost perfectly with philosophy. Over time, Confucian thought deeply influenced social life in China, including how people ate together. Meals were not just about nourishment. They were about harmony, order, respect. There is a long-standing idea, often attributed to Confucius himself, that knives had no place at the table because they symbolized violence. Whether or not the historical details are exact, the sentiment reveals something important. A dining table was meant to be calm, a space where aggression stayed outside. Chopsticks are inherently non-threatening. They don't stab. They don't slice. They require control rather than force. Even the act of eating becomes quieter, slower, more deliberate. In this way, chopsticks didn't just suit the food. They suited an ideal, a vision of the meal as a peaceful, shared moment rather than a continuation of struggle. Once a tool fits both the body and the values of a society, it becomes incredibly durable. Chopsticks spread beyond China as trade, ideas, and people moved. By around the middle of the first millennium CE, they had reached Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. But they didn't remain identical. Each culture reshaped them. In Korea, chopsticks were often made of metal, commonly brass or silver. They became flatter and slightly heavier, paired almost always with a spoon. The spoon handled rice and soup. The chopsticks handled side dishes. In Japan, chopsticks became shorter and more pointed, reflecting a cuisine that valued precision and delicacy. Personal chopsticks became important, each person having their own set. In Vietnam, chopsticks tended to be longer, often made of bamboo or wood, suited to reaching into shared dishes and bowls. Same basic idea. Different hands, different tables, different rhythms. The materials themselves tell another story. Chopsticks have been crafted from bamboo, wood, bone, jade, ivory, silver, and even gold. But bamboo and wood endured because they feel right. They're warm, lightweight, gentle on bowls. They don't clang or scrape harshly. They feel less like tools and more like extensions of the hand. And once something is held that often, etiquette grows around it. Rules form quietly. Never stick chopsticks upright in rice because it resembles funeral incense. Don't pass food directly from one pair of chopsticks to another because it echoes ritual handling of bones after cremation. Even how you rest them matters. Across a bowl, on a stand, beside the plate. These gestures communicate respect without words. This is how a practical object becomes cultural. Not through speeches, but through repetition until motion becomes meaning. Even the English word chopsticks carries a story of movement and misunderstanding. When European traders encountered chopsticks in Asia, they didn't adopt the local names. Instead, they used trade slang. The word chop comes from Pidgin English, derived from terms associated with speed and efficiency. Chop chop meant hurry, quick, fast. The sticks became chopsticks, not because they chopped, but because they were associated with quick handling of food. A name born not in philosophy, but on ships and docks. It's a reminder that objects don't just travel. Words travel with them, bending to new mouths and new needs. So what do people usually get wrong about chopsticks? The biggest mistake is thinking they exist purely because of preference or tradition. Preference is the surface. Structure is the reason. How food is prepared. How it's served. What a meal is meant to feel like. Another misunderstanding is assuming chopsticks replaced knives because chopsticks are superior. They're not universally better. They're better at one job. Lifting small pieces. The knife didn't disappear. It moved backstage, into the kitchen, where the cutting happens before the meal begins. And many people assume chopsticks were always meant for eating. In reality, their earliest role was handling heat. Cooking came first. The table followed. Once you see that, the story feels surprisingly modern. Change the kitchen, and the table changes too. That leads us to a simple mental shortcut you can carry anywhere. The 5-second rule. Predict the utensil from the food. Look at what arrives on the table. If the kitchen did the cutting, the table doesn't need a blade. Stir fries, dumplings, noodles, hot pots, small grilled pieces meant to be shared. Chopsticks make immediate sense because they offer control without cutting. But if food arrives large and unfinished, expecting you to slice as you eat, forks and knives dominate. Steaks, roasts, thick sandwiches. It's not East versus West. It's where the cutting happens and what kind of experience the table is designed to create. So why were chopsticks invented? Not because someone wanted an elegant symbol. Not because forks hadn't been imagined yet. Chopsticks began as a practical response to heat, a safe way to reach into boiling pots. They moved to the table when fuel scarcity pushed kitchens to cut food smaller and cook faster. They stayed because they matched a philosophy that valued calm, restraint, and harmony at meals. And they spread because they were simple enough to adapt. Metal in one place, wood in another, short or long, personal or communal, always flexible. The next time you hold chopsticks, you're not just holding two sticks. You're holding an agreement between kitchen and table, between scarcity and efficiency, between practicality and meaning. A tool that learned manners and then quietly taught them. If this changed how you see chopsticks, tell me in the comments. What's the first dish you think of when you pick them up? And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind everyday things, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next small secret.